Good afternoon. I'm Joel Franklin. Welcome to JLG's Debut Author and Illustrator webinar. We can't wait for you to hear about the class of Spring 2016. Today, our special guest is Roger Sutton, Editor-in-Chief of the Hornbook. Both Deb and Roger have selected a few of the more than 40 debut authors and illustrators with amazing books being released this spring. But before we turn it over to them, I have a few housekeeping items. Please turn off pop-up blockers in your browser, as these may cause problems when viewing the webinar. If you're experiencing technical problems, please use the Help button on the audience console, and the webinar tech team will get to you as soon as possible. If your screen becomes locked, try using F5 to refresh the webinar console, and if you're on a Mac, use Command R. Need credit? A certificate for continuing education credit is available in the certification folder. It will also be available in the archived presentation. If you'd like to follow along, a handout of today's titles is in the Resources List folder. And if you have any questions or comments, you can send those in at any time via the red Q&A box. And please join the conversation on Twitter. You can tweet us at JR Library Guild and use the hashtag JLGWebinars. With more than 40 authors and illustrators with their first releases, Deb, how did you choose which ones to feature today?
Oh, that was a hard thing. They say it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it takes a team of editors to find great books, and I think the Hornbook and School Library Journal and Library Journal and JLG does that really well. So how do you actually find a debut? It's sometimes kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack, because sometimes you just read a tiny sentence on the end flap that says, this is his debut novel, or this is his first picture book. But we also have a great team of editors that you can say to the rest of the team. For example, Susan and her group up in New York, can you guys tell me whose debut? And there's also a great website. Roger, do you know that website about, what's it called, the debut class of 2016?
Oh, yeah, there's been a few of those. Yep.
Yep, so you can actually do a search of debut authors 2016, and you can find a list. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do this is because debut authors and illustrators are such a cool thing. To finally make it through the slush pile and all the great multiple-starred prolific authors and illustrators, and to finally get your book out, it's a cool thing. And to get a favorable starred review in the Hornbook or to be a JLG selection, that's even better. And so we want to take our hats off to these guys. And so let's talk about some of the ones. And we're going to talk about pre-K to 12, and we'll leave you all on the hook because you'll want to read all of these, even if you don't work with that age group. So the first one I want to talk about is Little One. And it's just so precious. It's written and illustrated by Jo Weaver. The interesting story about Jo is that before she became an illustrator, she was in international development, and she was a support worker for a homeless center. And then she got her degree at the Cambridge School of Art, and now she lives in England. You can follow her on Facebook and Twitter. But her artwork for this is just so precious and so beautiful. It's a quiet story about Big Bear, the mom, and the little one, the little baby bear. It's done with charcoal artwork, and the reviews are calling it quietly stunning and quietly beautiful. But it's really interesting. I read just recently an interview, a visual interview, a picture interview, where Jo talked about her illustrations and how she came to the whole story. In fact, when she started writing this book, there was no baby bear. How about that? And so it made it a whole completely different story. But she said that she wanted to create a book that would evoke an emotional response for the reader. And so to do that, she needed to create strong relationships between the characters. And so what she started doing was drawing bears. And so she drew one bear, and he was too whimsical, and she drew one bear, and he was too real. It kind of felt like a National Geographic book, and that wasn't what she was looking for. So finally she came upon the bear that you see in this book, and she put in the eyes and the expression, and she's really good with eyebrow communication. You know, like with Mo Willems, it's the eyeball of the pigeon, right? We what he's trying to say. Look in his eyeballs. And for
it's
her,
amazing what he can do very simply in those books.
Exactly. And in this interview that I looked at, she shows the same bear with just one little change in the eyebrow in a 4-panel thing, and it tells a completely different story in each picture. It's amazing. But this is a story that takes us from spring to winter with the baby bear and his mom, and she's teaching him how to survive out in the wilderness and how to enjoy the world. And really, the world that she's pictured in this story is really a third character. And she really just brings it to life. And it's just one of those books, when you finish, you just kind of want to hug it to your chest and you want to read it again. And, of course, when you share this with your little ones, that's exactly what they'll say. They'll clap their little hands and say, read them again, read them again.
That's a test, isn't it?
It is. It is. So that's one of our first books that I wanted to share with you. And now Roger's going to tell us about a book with a whole different tone.
Very different. This is not a quiet book at all. My Dog's a Chicken, by Susan McElroy Montanari and illustrated by Ann Wilsdorf. And this book reminds me of how difficult it actually is to create an effective picture book. You know, people think that it's easy because there aren't many words, and as you know, Deb, we see a lot of celebrity picture books.
Yes.
Because it's an easy thing to do, and it has pictures that will sell it along with the name of the star who wrote the story. But what those books tend to forget is that a picture book story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, which sounds very simple and basic and obvious, but clearly not obvious enough because too many books don't have those 3 required elements. And this book certainly has all 3 of those. It is a twist on the old story of the kid who wants a dog. I don't know how many of those books there are, and she can't have a dog, so she gets a chicken. Her parents say, they live on a farm, and the parents say, okay, have a chicken. So, and she treats her chicken like a dog and teaches her chicken to do tricks like a dog and to love her like a dog. And it's really sweet. There's a good flow to the story. And one thing that I always look for in a picture book is its potential for story hour use. I guess as a former children's librarian, that's always upmost in my mind. Will this book work read aloud to a group of children? Oh my goodness, absolutely. This one, it has all kinds of sound effects like bark, 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 which librarians love to do and kids love to join in. So
absolutely.
If our first story was very quiet, our second story is extremely loud.
Absolutely. And it's again, but another story where they're just going to clap their hands and maybe want a ticket.
I remember doing an interview once with a veteran librarian, and she said that it's the book, the great thing about libraries is that the kid can come in and read all different kinds of books. And it's the book that the kid wants again and again. That's the book that the parents need to buy to have in their home library.
That's a very good philosophy, I think. Yep. So on a completely different end of the spectrum, going from picture books for the little guys to an adult book, actually, because this book is in our adult crossover high school. So it could be a book for adults. It can be a book for young adults. But this is another debut author, of course, Caitlin Greenidge. No R in there. It's Greenidge. Took me a while, but after typing it up, I got it. She lives in Brooklyn now, and she's published a lot, but in journals. And so this is her first novel. But I love the backstory of this because she, after she got her degree at Hunter College, she went back to the library, and 7 days a week, she wrote. And she made herself sit in her chair for 4 hours, regardless of whether she was getting anything done or not. She just had to sit in the chair and write. And so lots of people, of course, want to know, what does it take to be an author? And so That's what she did to be an author. But her story is about race, and it's about language. And it's fiction, but the whole time I'm reading it, I'm thinking, is this real? Did this really happen? I bet this really happened. And, sometimes I read right too close to a device, so I have to look it up. So I wanted to, I want to know, is Tonabee Institute a real place? No, it's not. Stars of the Morning, is that a real organization where children are initiated into it and they grow up kind of like cotillion girls in the South? No, it's not really, but it reads like that. But it's told in two voices and two time periods, and it's about a black family who goes to New England to live in an institute and teach a chimpanzee sign language back in the 70s. So I hate to say this, but it makes it historical fiction, does it not?
Yeah, we're old, Deb.
God, that makes my heart hurt. But yeah, so it's historical fiction. And then it seriously is historical fiction because it's told in another voice. Nymphadora tells a story back in the 20s where she was involved with this institute. Well, it turns out there's some things in this institute's past that are just not good. And she talks about it in an article that she wrote about scientific racism, which I don't know too very much about. But after reading this book, I can put the pieces together because there is an anthropologist at the Institute in the 20s, and he wants to study all the black people who live on the other side of the tracks, and he's comparing them to these chimpanzees. Word gets out about that, and of course, yeah, bad, very bad. And it pretty much shuts the whole thing down. But then later comes back, we have this new family, we're going to turn the whole thing around, but it doesn't go well either because there are some things that happen within the family that cause angst in the family itself. It's also got some coming of age in it too, but all the reviews are saying that the voices of the narrators, whether it's the 17-year-old girl in the 70s or it's the young girl, Nymphadora, as she's growing up and crossing some bridges that she probably shouldn't have crossed. But it's a powerful story, and the whole point of her doing it is that she thinks that language, the author thinks that language is really, we don't have the right kind of language to talk about race. Even now, we're still going over the same ground over and over and over again. So it's a book that when your teens read it, they're going to want to talk about it too, which might happen in the same book. Yes, Roger?
I didn't know that JLG had this level of adult books for high school kids, and I think that's terrific. That with so many adults crossing over to read YA, I think it's important to remember that adult books are for teenagers as well.
Absolutely. And so this fall, we're adding actually crossover nonfiction. So we're excited about that. So it'll be adult crossover nonfiction for high school in the fall. So Susan and her team are working on that. We're pretty excited about that. I think Susan's been wanting to do that for a while. So tell us about the smell of other people's houses.
The smell of other people's houses, which again,
what a title.
Old. Yes, and also historical fiction set in 1970s Alaska. And one gap that this book really fills is that even though it's 70s, it's in the 70s, it's essentially a contemporary story, and we have relatively few books about contemporary kids in other than city or suburban settings. Just everyday life stories of kids who live in the woods, kids who live, far from anybody else, and lots of kids do live that way. So I think it's great that we have this. This is a novel where 4 different stories intersect as the characters' lives sort of touch each other's. As you can imagine from the title, the sensory depictions are very rich. You feel like you're there. You feel like you're experiencing what the characters are as you're with them, and sort of the things that they can smell, the things that they touch, the things that they hear all of that becomes very, very real. And I think it's really neat that while you think you're reading 4 different stories, as they come together, you get that sort of satisfying click of, oh, right, here's here's the grandmother from that other story is now in this one. And I thought that was neat.
Yeah, and I'll just tell you, folks, it's a tissue book. Tissue.
Yeah,
I thought
we
I
were
was going to
talking
make
about
it,
that before we came on, books that make you cry.
Yep. It's got that at the end.
I know a librarian who maintains a book list of those, because there are people, that's why they like to read, because they like books that make them cry. So.
Yeah. Well, when you cry, it means it touched your heart, and I think hats off to Bonnie Sue for getting that and tying up all those ends and all those people into one tidy little package at the end.
I want to make a note here. When you were talking earlier about seeking out first-time authors and illustrators, at the Hornbook you have a harder road to hoe because we don't pay any attention to who wrote a book or who published a book or anything, really. It's all just the text. And it's not until the review is actually being edited that we look for more information about the story. So if you're a first-time author or illustrator, just know that to be selected for review by the Hornbook magazine really is a badge that you've joined the crowd.
Absolutely.
So, Bonnie Sue, congratulations.
Yay. Well, it's like I tell people all the time when I'm on the road. The Hornbook only writes about the stuff that they love. You don't have to take them out for them to tell you about the stuff they didn't like. But they're only going to write about the stuff that they love. And so to get in the Hornbook, that's a big deal. It's a big deal. So let's talk. I'm going to talk about another book. So you might be looking at this, those of you who work with middle school, and say, Sarah Weeks, she's not new. We love her. We've read. She's got a whole shelf in my library. And she probably does because she's a K-8 writing girl, little writing machine. But this time she's got a partner. And I love that her partner, Jita, and now I'm going to try because Lizette told me how to say it. Let me think it in my head. Varadarajan. That's how you say it.
Varadarajan.
Yes. And Jita was a student of Sarah's in New York. And they ended up writing this book together. And so it's told in two voices. Joe, a fifth-grade white guy who is he knows fifth grade is going to stink just like last year did. He's going to be picked on. He's got a hearing disorder that he can't filter out all the sounds. And so he's in, a special ed class, and people pick on him, et cetera, et cetera. But his counterpart in this book is a boy who's straight off the boat from India. And his name is Ravi. Well, and everybody wants to call him, of course, what? Ravi, right? They look at it and Americanize it. But over there, he was, top of his class. He was popular. He had so many friends. But then he comes over here to America, and he's all prepared with all his, he's a rule follower, and he has all the supplies he's supposed to have, and his jeans are pressed, and his shirt is pressed, even his little polo shirt, and he buttons it all the way up to his neck, and he is picked on from day one, and he's just stunned. And so it sort of shifts him into this I don't even know who I am thing now. And so inevitably, of course, he doesn't want anything to do with this loser kid. He wants to be with the popular guy who is an American-born Indian. And, of course, something happens that brings the two of them together that if they could just combine their powers, they could defeat the bad guys. So when the two of them were working on it, they called it Lunch at Albert Einstein, which is the name of the school. But she has published actually another book in her country. It's a nonfiction book about the animal kingdom, Masters of Trickery. And she got the idea because her father worked on a tea plantation in India, and he would come home with leeches all over him. And she knows, from her own children, she knows kids love, all that gross stuff and the leeches and all that kind of stuff. And so she wrote that nonfiction book. Then the whole tea farm and the leeches and stuff show up really importantly in Save Me a Seat. But what I love about her is a lot of times these debut authors are 12, Roger?
Yeah.
I'm like, really? Are you old enough? Are you out of school yet? It's like there is a debut this year, and he's 14, writing a memoir. He's 14 years old. But Gita was actually 40 in 2012. Yeah, I was like, yay!
One for the old folks.
Right. So she had to write a personal narrative to get into an institute, and she went, I think I could write. And ta-da!
Do we know how they divided responsibilities on this one?
Yeah, Sarah wrote the chapters on Joe, and Gita wrote the chapters on Ravi until they got to the the massive editing stuff, and then they kind of worked on it together at that point, I think. But because they're friends and they knew each other, that makes it a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Oh, here's a weird one.
Yes.
Anna and the Swallow Man by Gabrielle Savit, and I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is not going to be a book for everyone. It's extremely strange. It is about a little girl whose father is taken away by the Germans. She's left. She has nowhere to go. She's sitting on a street corner in front of a store where she had been befriended by the shopkeeper, but even he won't talk to her because with the father's disappearance, of course, we realize that this girl is herself marked for destruction, and no one wants to have anything to do with her. And along comes a mysterious man. Is he a man? The Swallow Man. Is he real? Is he sort of a totemic figure out of folklore? We just don't know. And the two of them embark upon this journey by foot across war-torn Europe, that World War II, which is just amazing in what Anna learns about how to survive in such a world and how to keep going. I think people who liked The Book Thief would also like this one, although this is simpler and shorter than that book. I feel like it's more direct. It's a different take on Holocaust stories, really not one I've seen before. I love that the way that the author keeps us off balance completely as to how much of this is realism, how much of this is magical realism, how much is fantasy. We just don't know, but he makes the landscape and the characters so intriguing that we stay with him, we trust him. And that is really the first thing that I require any author to do, is to give me something so that I trust him or her enough to want to go to the next page. And this book does that.
And you're right.
I see prizes for this one. What do you think?
Well, I was going to say that if you're a genreification library, I think you'd have a hard time deciding where to put this. So maybe it'll just be popular and it won't matter where it's shelved. It won't go back to where it's going. But I also agree with you. It's very Book Thief-like for a younger audience.
Yep.
And again, you're going to have discussion at the end because you might have questions. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, but no one's going to have the answers.
Nobody might have. That's right. Some
really
books are like that.
A lot of mystery. Yeah, I think
that's
great.
Yeah. Well, I would want, if I had a book like that, I would want people to think about it, to talk about it. I also think it's interesting that his background is in theater.
Right.
He's a singer and an actor, but his book is so serious. So, good for him. Picking up the pace a smidge and into something a little bit different. For our upper elementary group, this is a great book, Jazz Day, The Making of a Famous Photograph. And it literally is about a photograph and how it came to be. From 1958, Esquire magazine was doing a feature article about jazz. And so the graphic artist decided, wouldn't it be cool if we could just go into the city and we'll just get a bunch of jazz musicians together and take a picture? Well, first of all, he didn't have camera. He had borrowed cameras. Secondly, he didn't even know if anybody would show up. And the book is actually a series of poems about what happened on Jazz Day and how the different artists showed up. And the illustrations, though, the illustrator, Francis Vallejo, this is his first picture book, and his acrylic and pastel paintings kind of just pull what's going on in the poem right out. And just, in fact, this morning, I think anytime, I know, Roger, y'all don't look, but I look, I have to tell you, because part of my job is to give you stuff beyond the books. And so I look for book trailers and lesson plans and excerpts and audio and all those kind of things. And so when I find out a book is Candlewick, I'm like, yay, thank you, because they work so hard at all that extra stuff. And sure enough, this morning I found a book trailer where Francis is talking about some of the work that he did for this book. There's a picture, an illustration in the book about Maxine Sullivan, the singer, and she was one of the few women who showed up for this photograph. And he was inspired by Norman Rockwell, and it's very Norman Rockwell type illustration where all the men are kind of gathered around Maxine, and then the poem goes along with it. But my favorite thing about this book is when you get, he's herding like cats to try to get these guys all together to let's take a picture, and then you come to a fold-out page that says click, and you open it up, and it's the photograph. Every time I open it, I get
you've got to know all these people and what it's taken to get them all together, and their backstories. And it's like, what happened? And then you come to this, this blank spread saying click, and then you open it wide, and there's the famous photograph. It's brilliant.
And I love these boys in the front. They've been waiting all day. The little girls upstairs, they've been waiting for this picture to happen too, so they can go back out in the yard and play. And then, and it even goes past that to talk about what happened afterwards to Art Kane and his situation. And there's great back matter biographies of the artist that showed up that day, and it's brilliant. Love it. And then another picture book.
Another picture book for very young readers. I would say this is for kids who know what the alphabet is and have started to learn how to spell but haven't gotten very far. It's almost completely wordless. A little boy and his dog are out fishing, and they throw in the line, and they pull out an F, and they pull out an I, and they pull out an S, and they pull out, not so fast, it's not going to spell fish, not yet. And it becomes this sort of wild underwater alphabet where you see all these letter forms swimming in the pond. And it's about, herding those letters together and finally, getting our FISH connected in the right order. This is going to crack little kids up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think that it seems like a very simple joke to us, but it's the sort of humor that they're going to go back to again and again.
Yeah, and even older. I like how you said you got to have a little bit of a grasp of the alphabet before you can jump right in there, because otherwise, it might be reading like me reading Amelia Bedelia to kindergarten. They don't think it's funny.
Yeah, they don't get it yet. They don't understand the wordplay.
They don't get it yet. Mm-mm. Paper Wish is
the sort of... Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that this, we have alphabet books, but then we need books that show kids that having learned the alphabet was worthwhile. That's all.
Oh, that's a very good point. I like that. That could be a quote on Pinterest. Paper Wishes. Lois Sepabon. Sepabon is actually Persian. It's her husband's name. She actually grew up in California. And now they live in Kentucky on a small farm with a barn and plenty of room for needy animals, which makes sense if you've read this book, because the great premise of the story is that a Japanese American girl in 1942 is being sent from Bainbridge Island to Manzanar. And to go, they just packed up their suitcases and out the door they go. But she wants her dog to come with them. So she hides her dog away in her coat, and of course the dog is caught, and she has to just let him go. And when she gets to Manzanar, she's so shut down by that whole thing, and she feels so guilty that she becomes mute. And so it's a story of Manzanar and the war and prejudice, but driving the story is the paper wishes that the little girl makes, Manami, that she makes, that her dog would come back, that her brother would come to Manzanar, and all the things that happen because of her wishes. Manzanar is something that... Yeah.
Can I say something brief about this? Do we have time?
Yeah, we will make time.
Okay, when I read this, I thought of Kirby Larson's book, Dash. I'm on the Scott Odell Award Committee, and this book won 2 years ago, and Dash did. And again, it's a Japanese-American girl sent to a camp missing her dog. And what this book reminded me of is how the same elements in different hands make a completely different story.
Oh, yes.
That
absolutely.
The outlines are the same, but the characterization is so different, the writing is so different, the tone is so different. You know, there's a big world out there to explore.
There is. And so I also, this book is in the live binder for spring, and so there you'll see some photographs that Ansel Adams took that are on in the Library of Congress collection, and you'll see some Manzanar interviews from an NBC article, and you'll also see a link to the Manzanar National Park. And then for Roger's last book, we have a young adult book.
This is definitely a young adult book. I would say junior high kids would be interested, but also high school. This is where it ends. It is a story of a school shooting where a young man has rounded up basically his entire high school into the auditorium. He's on the stage, and he has a gun. And he's not afraid to use it. You know, so many school shooting books are about will someone be shot or not. Well, lots of people get shot in this book. Lots of people die in this book. It is really uncompromising in its treatment of this problem. It's a brave book in that aspect. Told from the point of view of 4 different characters, some of whom are in the auditorium and some of whom are outside, and sort of finding out what's going on from police radios. Because, you know, the whole town is now outside this auditorium, afraid to go in, not knowing what to do, wanting to save these kids, and then hearing gunshots. It's very grim stuff, but brilliantly done.
It is. It is. And I like her whole treatment of what happens. And, yep. So, on a whole different tone, A Study in Charlotte.
Thank goodness.
Yes. I was like, oh, God. Let's end with something on the up. This is Brittany, or Brie Cavallero. She's Italian. And her study in Charlotte, I just like the whole premise of this story. So we all know Sherlock Holmes and Watson and the pair, the two of them. This is years and years in the future, fiction, when a boy named Watson is given a rugby scholarship into a New England prep school. And who is also at this school? None other than Sherlock Holmes' ancestor. And so he, of course, has just loved her from afar. And to finally meet her, he's just almost beside himself. And so when he gets into a conversation with a bully who is being, well, here comes my southernness. He's being ugly about her. Watson is just not having it. And he's like, if you say anything else like that, I'm just going to kill you. Well, the next time he sees him, he's dead. And, of course, the main suspects are, Sherlock and Watson. And so this is the first book in a trilogy. There is a great book trailer. The author, Bree, she's written a lot of poetry and published that, too. She's currently actually an assistant editor and editor-in-chief of a couple of journals in Wisconsin, is it Michigan, where she lives. She's at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, getting her PhD. Good for her. Congratulations, Missy. Do good, good, good. She lives there with her husband, her cat, and her deer stalker cap collection. But the book's also been given foreign rights to Germany, Brazil, France, Japan, and Taiwan.
It's amazing how these Sherlock Holmes stories are so durable, and they just pop up year after year.
Well, and in this one,
in all forms, movies, TV.
Even today, I mean, there's a new series, I think now, on Sherlock. But in this story, the murders are all copycats of Sherlock Holmes stories.
Uh-huh.
So they got to figure out who the bad guy is before it's too late, because at some point they become what they're looking for. Not only are they suspects, they're going to be the victims. So if we had more time, which we don't because we're out of time, we would talk about some of these, like Morigami or Guile, which Leslie talked about actually last month, and The Night Parade. This Kid Can Fly, that's the 14-year-old kid who wrote that with Tanya Bolden. The Night Gardener, written by two brothers. Gorgeous, gorgeous picture book. The Crown's Game. Nadia, the girl who couldn't sit still. Summer Lost. Ali Condi, of course, is big name you see on the front. She's not a new author, but this is a step away from young adult and to middle grade. And Shakespeare. Shallow Graves for young adult. And The Wild Robot, which Roger and I were talking about before. Peter Brown, of course, is not a new name to you, but this is his first novel.
Yeah.
Novel. Yep.
It's a good one.
And
too.
actually, I'm going to talk about it next month. When?
Yes, please join us next month when Leslie will join Deb and look at the stars so far. More than 100 of our selections have multiple starred reviews, and it's only the middle of March. So mark your calendar for April 12th, that's 3 o'clock Eastern, and join us.
And remember to check our website after the webcast for the post-presentation post. You'll find a list of the books with links to their book detail pages in the Hornbook and School Library Journal. And remember to look in our spring live binder for links and resources for these and other forthcoming books.
Can I make a brief plug here?
Oh, absolutely, Roger.
Also remember to look for the July-August awards issue of the Hornbook. We're going to have a special sponsored supplement there, interviews with 5 new authors and illustrators.
Awesome. And make sure you read the post-presentation post because there are links to Roger's new Hornbook podcast. So you don't want to miss that. And if you're not already getting the newsletter, make sure you sign up for that too.
Thanks, Deb. Another awesome webcast. And special thanks to Roger Sutton for making time during his vacation to talk shop. And we certainly want to thank everybody for making time for us today. And if you'd like to know more about JLG and its services or our new categories, you can contact your account rep or send an email to sales@juniorlibraryguild.com. Tomorrow, you'll receive an automatic email regarding today's webinar. And if you follow the link, you can watch the archived webinar and print your certificate of attendance after 10 minutes of viewing. Until next time, thanks again for joining us, and happy reading.